Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show that covers all things marketing. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast gives you the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. Whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand, you've come to the right place. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and thank you so much for joining me. Recently, I did an episode where I talked about the magic of Disney marketing. We covered everything from what Disney's budget looks like, to ideas they have done in the past, to examples of how you can use Disney's influence to inspire your own marketing. And so today I thought it would only be fair if I also talked about Disney's newest rival, Netflix. So we are going to be talking about the streaming giant's marketing. We are going to again talk about the budget. We're going to give you some examples of how you can use Netflix's ideas to influence your own marketing, but we're also going to go over the key elements of the different types of marketing that Netflix uses, because they don't just do strictly digital marketing, even though they are a digital platform. They do a lot of old school marketing techniques mixed with the new school. So we're going to discuss how and why they do all of those techniques, and we're going to talk about if maybe some of them will work for you and your strategies. Before we start today's podcast, I do just want to quickly remind everyone, if you're not already, please subscribe to this podcast and write a review down below. I absolutely love reading your guys' reviews. It gives me inspiration for future episodes, and it lets me know what you guys like and what you don't like, because I'm not perfect. I'm probably not doing everything 100% correct. So if you want me to change something, write it in the review down below, because I do love reading them and I do love responding to them as well. Also, I respond to comments over on social media. So if you're looking for questions, if you're looking for answers, then head over to social media, because I will be over there responding to your questions, to your comments, and to your concerns all the time. Okay, so to start out today's podcast, let's talk about what is new in the marketing world. I always like to start off these podcasts giving you a bit of an update about what is happening in the marketing world, because it's always changing. And as people that work in the marketing world, we have to stay on top of that, because if suddenly Disney closes down, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but say they did, we all need to be aware of that, because that's going to impact all of us. Don't worry, no big changes like that are happening today. We are just going to talk about some stories that I hope will inspire your marketing or get you thinking about what is happening in the world around you. So the first one is a $10 million tourism marketing agreement between Washington County and Dixie State University gives the Trailblazer Stadium a new name. It'll now be called Greater Zion Stadium. So County Commissioner approved a 20-year strategic marketing agreement between the Dixie State and the Greater Zion Convention and Tourism Office, formerly the Washington County Convention and Tourism Office. The $10 million agreement will invest $500,000 annually in Dixie State, which is anticipated to net the county $2 million in a yearly marketing exposure in return. Kevin Lewis, the county tourism director, said, "The pieces just came together. It makes so much sense to unite and leverage the assets of the university and Greater Zion tourism in a way that will benefit residents and visitors." In exchange for marketing exposure, Dixie State gets funds to go towards the completion of a planned renovations and additions to the now called Greater Zion Stadium. The new Greater Zion Stadium will include an entry plaza, corporate-level seating, and a press box. There will also be 8 to 10 new suites where there will be club-type seating and a banquet room. So a lot of changes happening, and obviously, unless you live in Dixie State, you probably don't care about the stadium name changing. But the reason I brought it up and the reason I find the story so interesting is because it really is to companies joining together for the greater good and really using those marketing advantages to leverage new marketing strategies together and working towards a greater purpose. Our next story is William K. Marimo, the former editor of The Inquirer, joins Brian Tierney's marketing and communications agency, Brian Communications. William Marimo said, "What I will be doing is working with Brian's clients on marketing strategies, communications, and how to forge relationships with journalists that will benefit both the media and the clients. We will help companies be more effective in their communications." Marimo, for those of you that didn't know, with The Inquirer had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes as a reporter and one for public service in 1978 and another one for investigative reporting in 1985. And just to make this story extra interesting, Tierney, who's Marimo had just joined his company, remains a member of The Inquirer's board of directors. So definitely a lot of relationships in marketing and a lot of networking going on that we should all be aware of, because those are 2 very big names joining forces. Their communications agency is obviously going to benefit from this partnership, but also as marketers, we can benefit from the content that they're going to be creating, because those are 2 very big names. They are very well established in their careers. So, for example, as we're taking inspiration from Netflix, we can also turn to Brian Communications and take a look at what they're producing as well. Our next story is that international growth helped Netflix beat expectations in the last quarter of 2019. So I just want to be very clear that the reason I am bringing Netflix up so soon isn't because we're going to be diving into any of this stuff, but it was just more, I thought it would be a nice lead in into the rest of today's program to just sort of talk about where Netflix is currently at, because we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about what Netflix has done in the past. So the company acknowledged that competition had an impact in the United States, where growth missed Wall Street targets, and the competition will become more global as the Disney Plus service launches in Europe in March. The company wrote in a letter to investors that despite the big debut of Disney Plus and the launch of Apple TV, our viewing per membership grew both globally and in the US on a year-over-year basis, consistent with recent quarters. That number beat Wall Street estimates for the 4th quarter, helping to send shares up 2.2% after hours trading on Tuesday. So just super interesting because, again, like I said, we're going to be talking about what has happened with Netflix and how they were growing in the past. So it's really good just to get a reminder that they're still growing and they're still changing. But we're definitely going to keep an eye on this story. Like it says that Disney Plus is planning on reaching into the European countries in March. I believe it's March 24th is when it will have a big debut over there. So it'll be interesting to see how Netflix performs in its next quarter, seeing if they still have a rise in subscription growth. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, we are going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of Netflix's marketing. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jakewish, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast covers everything tech. The hottest mobile phones, tablets, games. We review it, rate it, test it. Whether you're Microsoft or Apple, Android or iPhone, we'll give it to you black and white. The Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and thank you for joining me on today's podcast, where we will be talking about Netflix's marketing. So Netflix, for a very long time, was the number one streaming service across the United States and America and Europe and all these countries. It's really big everywhere, but now it is definitely seeing more competition with the debut of Disney Plus. So I thought it'd be really interesting to right now, right as Disney Plus is still local to North America, for us to take a look at what Netflix has done and how it is continuing to grow and change and use all of the tools in their marketing tool belt to really create some amazing marketing content that I think will inspire you and sort of get your creative juices going and flowing so that you can create content of similar magnitude. Even though we might not have Netflix's spending budget, we do have the ability to emulate and take inspiration from what Netflix is doing. So that's really what I'm trying to do with today's podcast. I'm trying to inspire you to push yourself in the same way Netflix pushes their marketing, because marketing can be a lot of fun and it can be a real drain on your creativity. And there have been so many times that I've hit a roadblock when creating a campaign or trying to come up with just a funny and new, interesting way to sell couches. Like, it changes all the time. So I think having companies that you can look at to feel inspiration from is really, really important. And Netflix is definitely one of those companies. I did a podcast last week that you can go check out about Disney and Disney's marketing. So if you're more of a Disney person and less of a Netflix person, then you can definitely go listen to that podcast and get some inspiration from them as well. So to start off, let's talk about Netflix's marketing budget and how they spend their marketing dollars. So marketing costs grew 65% in 2018 to $2.37 billion. And then in 2019, it grew 22% to $2.9 billion. So although the growth was different from 2018 to 2019, that is still a lot of marketing dollars that they are using to produce their content. We're going to give you examples of the content they're producing later in today's episode, because they really have come up with some fun and creative strategies to market their original content. Because here's the big thing with Netflix is they have a lot of shows, and let's pretend that I recorded this podcast in 2019. Like, let's use some time travel here, go back in time and talk about how Netflix used to have Friends, and currently they still have The Office, but they're not going to have The Office forever. And what's really interesting is that those shows don't require marketing to be done for them, because people know they're on Netflix, people already know they like them, or people already know their popularity, so they don't feel a need to promote those projects as much, whereas Netflix has a lot of Netflix original content that does require a lot of marketing and a lot of promotional push to really make them the hits that they are. Because there are some really big Netflix hits, right? Like we got Stranger Things and Orange is the New Black and The Bird Box. But then there are some flops too that Netflix creates these shows and then they sort of go away without a whisper. The Santa Clarita Diet, Chewing Gum, just a lot of shows that, although they're very good and they're really great content, they perhaps were not marketed in the proper way for their content, or they just didn't have the audience. So Netflix didn't use their marketing dollars to promote those shows, and those shows fell short. So Netflix spent $12 billion on content in 2018. So this is really interesting because, again, like I'm saying, Netflix puts a lot of money into their own original content, and it shows, right? Like there are really great series like Glow that obviously a lot of money goes into, because they have to do things like make an entire Las Vegas casino look like it's in 1980, and that costs money. And they have Alison Brie on that show, and she costs money to come on and act every year. So they're definitely using those dollars for both their marketing reasons and their actual content creation. And I think the important thing to take away from that is that it is important to invest in something you are producing. Netflix doesn't need to produce original content. Netflix, years ago, for you young kids that are listening that might not know this, Netflix started out as like a DVD rental subscription. You could subscribe and rent and they'd come to you in the mail. Honestly, I'm a little bit too young to remember how it worked, but it wasn't always a streaming service where you could watch new shows that were being created for you, or that you could watch new movies that would only be on this one platform. It was always really just a renting service. Like, you could rent movies from there, as crazy as that sounds, and then you had to mail it back to Netflix. But Netflix has changed a lot about themselves over the past decade, and one of them being is that they now create original content. And not only that, they create original content that is supposed to be better than anything you can find on cable. Like, they are recovering TV shows that had been canceled, like Gilmore Girls and One Day at a Time. They are bringing actors who haven't acted in years, like Grace and Frankie, which features Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. They are really trying to give life to something that hasn't had life before. And now, obviously, streaming services have copied this idea. Amazon Prime has The Boys and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and Disney Plus is going to have the Lizzie McGuire reboot. So obviously this is a strong idea, but it's an idea that I really want you to take with you at the end of this podcast, because it's about investing in ideas that you're passionate about, because obviously there are people at Netflix who are passionate about creating this content and are passionate about storytelling, and that's what makes the content so good and so real, and why it's worth the $12 billion budget. So then the streaming service spent $12.4 billion in cash on content, up 35% from the $8.9 billion in 2017. So again, another really big growth jump here, but I feel like that really is showcased in the types of shows that they're producing and the type of content they're producing for those shows to promote them. A few Netflix shows have been canceled. It isn't always rosies and stars and everything's great. Look at our successful shows. Girl Boss only got one season. One Day at a Time has now been canceled, and people were very upset about that. And some movies are a flop and people don't like them. Or the exact opposite, people really love the movies, like A Christmas Prince, and then Netflix makes sassy comments about how you should not like The Christmas Prince because maybe it isn't actually a good movie. I don't know. I really enjoyed The Christmas Prince, if we're being honest, but we're getting off topic. So what I'm really trying to get at here, and the reason I want to talk about both their marketing budget and what they're spending on creating their content, is because you can make amazing marketing campaigns and you can spend the $2.37 billion that they're spending on marketing, but it's not going to mean anything if your content isn't there, if your content isn't at the level that you're passionate about, and it's not at the level where other people can become passionate about it. And so I feel like that's really what Netflix focuses on, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is how do they get their content to be loved by so many people, and they are still very, very proud of it. So we're definitely going to talk about all that and more in the rest of today's podcast. But for now, because I know I just threw a lot of numbers and stats and facts and dollar amounts at you, let's take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to be giving you the top 5 things that Netflix does with their marketing that you can use in your own marketing. So stay tuned, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and thank you for joining me today. Before the break, we were talking about Netflix's marketing dollars and their ad budgets. So we talked about how it's grown 65% in 2018 compared to 2017, but it only grew 22% in 2019. So it'll also be interesting to look at a year from now how it grew with the rise of Disney Plus, with the rise of all their new content coming and going because they are losing content. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much money they put forward towards their marketing and towards creating their actual content. Now that we are back from our break, I'm going to give you the top 5 things that Netflix does with their marketing that you can take and use in your own marketing. It's basically the top 5 key points that they always make sure is in every marketing campaign, is in every commercial, is on every billboard, is in every tweet. And it's just something that the 5 points are always present and they're always there. So the first one is knowing why their customers love their product. This is so important, and it's something that I talk about a lot, but I'll never be able to talk about enough because you can really love your product, and I'm going to talk about later how important it is that you love your content because we already talked about that a little bit. You do need to be proud of what you're producing, but if your audience doesn't love it, then you don't have an audience and you don't have anyone to sell it to. And something that Netflix does really well, and just to give you the example, Netflix understands that their customers like binge watching their shows. So instead of releasing a series once a week or releasing the entire series and then waiting 2 years before they release another, they always release their series in huge chunks, and then the next season will come out a few months later, or maybe at most a year, but I've never seen it go a full year, maybe 11 months, and then the new content will be out, because they understand that people want to curl up on their couch and watch that show, so they're going to make it accessible for people to do that. So what I want to ask you is, do you know why your customers love your product, and are you emphasizing that with your product? The next thing that they always do is they optimize their content for mobile. So not only can you watch their shows on your iPhone, all of their content, all of their marketing, all of their menus, everything is all optimized so that people can watch it on their phone, on their tablet, on their TV, on their iPad, which is a tablet. I already said that, I understand. But what I'm trying to get at is that you need to make sure that your product is accessible in the areas that people are using it in, because maybe your product isn't a mobile product. Maybe you're selling plumbing equipment, and your plumbing equipment, it doesn't matter if it looks good on a phone. It doesn't matter if it looks good in a selfie. What it matters is that people can use it in the way that they need to use it. People need to use Netflix on their phone. People like watching it on the bus. People like watching it in bed before they fall asleep. People like watching it on an airplane. Is your product able to move with the person of how they're using it? Is it able to alter and transform to fit the lifestyle of the customer? The next one is a present and consistent brand identity. So this is so true, but also Netflix did do a big switcheroo a few years ago where they got rid of that classic drop shadow that was behind Netflix, and they kind of changed their brand up a little bit. But the main thing that's never changed is that really powerful red color. And brand identity is just so important because it's how people recognize your brand anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter what language they speak or where they come from. People understand that Netflix color with the white writing. People can recognize that brand, see it anywhere, get it anywhere, and understand what it means and the brand associated with it. So I know I always talk about this too, but I really always want to stress that you need a consistent brand and that it needs to look like that across the board. It needs to look like that on your billboards. It needs to look like that on your brochures. It needs to look like that on your website. Basically, if Netflix was to start using a different color red on their commercials, people would be thrown. It seems like such a small change, but it's not. It's a big deal to people who have already made that mental connection of Netflix being that really bright cherry red. So definitely take that into consideration if you're thinking about changing up your brand and changing up your logo. Make sure that there's always one consistent item that stays with your brand no matter what. The next one is timed content. So you'll notice that Netflix releases their shows not in the same way of a normal cable or television network. Like I already said, they're not putting them out one episode a week for a year. They will put out 7 episodes, wait 11 months, put out 7 more episodes. And what makes that even more attractive to an audience, if it makes sense why those episodes are being released at the time. A really good example, and we're going to talk about this show more, but Stranger Things is usually released around Halloween. So it's a little bit of a themed timing with that of, you know, Stranger Things is a very Halloweenish show. I believe it's a little scary. It's sci-fi. It's fantasy. It is the 80s. People love to dress up as Stranger Things for Halloween. So it just makes sense that they release that new episode dump near Halloween so that people are already in that mental mood of wanting to watch something scary, wanting to feel a little more retro to match their costume. So things just really line up perfectly when you time your content out appropriately. So they do this with a lot of shows around Valentine's Day. You can bet that there's going to be a bunch of love stories getting thrown up there. Around Christmas time, we'll be seeing a new installment of the Christmas Prince movie franchise come out every year. So they're just really good about timing their content to make sure that it's going to get the audience's attention in the way that it deserves. The last one is creating their original content. So I've already talked about this a lot, but it really is so true to Netflix's brand and to Netflix's customer base. I've talked to a lot of people about, will you keep using Netflix when The Office is gone? It used to be, would you keep using Netflix when Friends is gone? But Friends is gone and people are still using Netflix. So will you keep using it when The Office is gone? And the main response I usually get is, well, yeah, because Glow isn't gone yet, right? Like, I still have to watch the last season of Glow. And the thing is, although there is only one more season of Glow, there's always going to be a new show that people are attracted to or enhanced or mesmerized by, that they want to keep the Netflix subscription around just to watch that one show. And the point also was made to me of just cancel cable and then subscribe to all the subscription sites, and then you're good. You won't miss out on content ever again, and it's probably cheaper. So it's definitely just something to consider when I'm talking about creating original content, because I think it's really going to be the main reason Netflix sticks around in the future. It's going to be the main reason people continue to subscribe to the streaming service, because they have this original content that in the past has been successful, and I can't see it not being successful in the future. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take another break from the podcast, but when we come back, I am going to give you the top 5 best examples that Netflix has done for their marketing to market their shows. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. So before the break, we were talking about Netflix's marketing and the top 5 key things that they always do to ensure that they're using their marketing dollars appropriately. So they are creating original content. Their content is always timed with when it is released. They have a present and a consistent brand. They optimize their content for mobile use, and they understand why their customers use their product, and they utilize that information. Now that we are back from our break, I'm going to give you the top 5 best examples of the marketing content that Netflix has created over the past couple of years to promote their shows. So the first one is FU 2016. So during the 2015 Republican debate, 30 million people were shown a video from the unknown presidential candidate. At the end, it was revealed to be Frank Underwood from House of Cards. So Netflix worked with BBH New York and built a fake presidential campaign around the show's lead character. Obviously, we all know now that House of Cards ended without Frank Underwood due to other circumstances, and we're not going to get into any of those today. But what I want to talk about is, according to Netflix, the campaign became the top trending topic on Facebook and Twitter during the debate. It won a Grand Prix in the interrogated category at Cannes in 2016. More importantly, it propelled Netflix into the heart of the cultural conversation, exciting and existing fans and reaching a new audience. Because again, 30 million people were shown this commercial. Not all of them were House of Cards fans, but you can bet that all of them started watching the show after that because they were intrigued by it. So the reason I brought this example up is because I feel like it was just such a great example of, they could have just put out a commercial for House of Cards. They could have run a Facebook ad for House of Cards, but none of that matches the theme of the show. The show is a political drama. So let's make something to do with politics. Let's involve politics. Right now, during the 2015 Republican debate, politics was the main topic on everybody's mind. It was a really big campaign run, and people were excited to talk about it. So they decided to interject themselves into that conversation with the FU 2016 ad. The next one is Spanish lessons. To promote the launch of the second season of Narcos, Netflix partnered with the language app Babbel and We Are Social Milan to teach people how to speak Spanish like a Colombian drug dealer. Spanish lessons worked like any other language tool, except the lessons focused on situations featured in the series. After completing the demo, users were invited to register with their service to keep learning the Spanish or sign up to watch more Netflix featuring the show Narcos. The campaign reached more than 50 million people. 100,000 of them tried the experience, and Narcos' social following increased by 40%. So the reason I'm using this example, first of all, I've never seen Narcos, so I don't know much about that show. I obviously now know that it's about a Colombian drug lord. But more importantly, why I wanted to bring it up is because it was beneficial to both partners in this marketing ad. So Netflix got to promote their show, but Babbel got people encouraged to use their app. And afterward, were given the option of continue with the app and watch new Narcos, and it sort of just was a really great partnership between the two brands, and I always think that's really important in marketing, to make solid partnerships that benefit both parties. The next one also involves Narcos, and it is called the Censor Cut. So the streaming company wanted to advertise Narcos in Mexico and Thailand. However, the independent censorship consultant told Netflix that Thailand's overzealous censorship laws would not allow any of the content that was actually in the ad. This involved drug use, some sexual scenes, some scenes of violence, a lot of gun and stuff like that. So instead of removing the scenes entirely, because it would have been the entire ad, Netflix worked with JWT Bangkok, now Wonderman Thompson Bangkok, and cut around the offending images with each scene, leaving a clear enough outline that anyone could still identify the objects that were removed. I will tweet this commercial out later just because we'll be talking about it. But basically it's, a guy smoking in one scene, but instead of a cigarette there, it looks like it's just been edited out, and it has that like gray and white checkerboard look to it to make it look like, no, we took that out. We took the cigarette out. Don't worry. The campaign achieved the opposite effect of what the censorship is supposed to do by reaching 34 million people, a number that's equal to almost half of Thailand's population. So I just really liked this one because, again, we're talking about Narcos, and I'm starting to get a more clear image of what Narcos is really about. But it was just interesting to see Netflix sort of joke around with its own product and sort of make fun of a situation that was probably very frustrating to deal with. And I think that's one of the great things that Netflix always does, is that they always see the humor in things, and that they're always able to make light of a situation because it's content and it's creativity and it's entertainment, so it should be fun. The next one is, in the spring of 2017, House of Cards launched a Twitter feed in Brazil. An editorial manager of Netflix in Brazil decided to communicate as if she was sharing how she was feeling about the season with her close friends instead of on the actual Netflix account. So this sort of made the tone and shaped the tone of what Netflix's content is today, of how they use social media, and we'll talk about that more later. But it was, again, just another way to sort of laugh at themselves and take a break from being serious, because House of Cards, as we already talked about, is a very serious show, but people have strong feelings about it. So they just got someone to share their strong feelings about it, and in that way humanized the audience a little bit more, because then you're watching the show and you're like, I'm not the only one who thinks this passionately about House of Cards. This is great. Netflix also thinks this passionately about House of Cards. So it's just really important, I think, to always be communicating with your audience, and that's what Netflix was doing in the spring of 2017 when they were tweeting about House of Cards. The next one is Stranger Things and the Chicago Cubs and Snapchat. So that's right, 3 partnerships with this one. But before Stranger Things was released, fans who were at the June 24th game against the Atlanta Braves were treated to an exclusive Snapchat filter that turned the Chicago's Wrigley Field into the upside-down version of the stadium, which is a common theme in the show. Everyone loves a good Snapchat filter, and this one came with a creepy surprise when a huge Demogorgon? I don't know what that is. I don't watch the show. A Demogorgon pops out of the iconic sign, complete with the background music. So again, I just think this was a really great way to use the brand that they have established for Stranger Things and partner it with another very iconic brand, the Chicago Cubs, and Snapchat's technology, and really just create a product that everyone would be happy with and fans would be attracted to. Okay, everyone, so there are your top 5 examples of ways Netflix has used their marketing dollars to promote their original content. We're going to go ahead and take a short break, but when we come back, we are going to be talking more about Netflix's marketing. So stay tuned, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Before the break, I gave you 5 examples of Netflix's marketing that they have used to produce content for their original series. So we talked about the FU 2016 campaign, which was an actual political campaign used to endorse Frank Underwood, who is a character from House of Cards. We talked about Spanish lessons, which is when Netflix partnered with Babbel to promote their new show Narcos. They used the language app Babbel to teach people how to speak like a Colombian drug dealer. So they got to learn Spanish phrases, but only Spanish phrases that would be applicable in Narcos type situations. We talked about the censor cut, which is also another narco promotion where they cut the more risque features out of their commercial, but did it in a very funny and cheeky way to sort of get around the censor cut. We talked about how the House of Cards was promoted in 2017 by tweeting as if you're tweeting to your close friends or your family instead of on the actual Netflix account. So they really tried to make their audience feel engaged with this campaign and make them feel like they were understood because Netflix was also binge watching the new series. And finally, we talked about the Chicago Cubs Snapchat filter, which featured Wrigley Stadium getting turned into the upside down version of the stadium. So while reading these examples, it made me want to watch all 3 of those shows, and I've never seen any of those shows. I've seen bits of Stranger Things and I've seen bits of House of Cards, but I've never seen any of Narcos, and I definitely didn't even know what a Demogorgon is, if I'm even saying that right. If I'm not saying that right, tweet it out to me, Stranger Things fans, if you want to come at me. I would love to know how to say that word properly. But yeah, so it definitely made me want to watch all of those shows though. So I feel like that's just the best example of what Netflix's marketing does. It really does encourage people to interact with their content in any way. So now that we're back, we're going to be talking about the 3 mediums that Netflix uses to promote their work. So number 1 is their in-app notifications and even their old-fashioned emails to alert people. So although emails may seem a little old-fashioned now, although I think it's hilarious that I'm calling emails old-fashioned because how and why? But they are, because it's not a thing every company does anymore. But Netflix still does it, and I can speak from personal experience. It works. My mom will sometimes text me a screenshot of her phone being like, Dolly Parton Heartstrings season 1 is out, and she'll be like, Netflix just told me Dolly Parton has a new series. Isn't that amazing? And it is amazing. And I get excited because Netflix just sent me the same notification. So it's just a way to really capture your audience's attention in a moment, to keep them focused for that 1 second and to get them excited, because I think the idea is that not that everyone's going to immediately drop everything and go watch the Dolly Parton show, but they are going to be like, oh, right, I was looking for something new to watch, and Netflix notified me this morning, so maybe tonight I'll watch the Dolly Parton show. So it sort of keeps it in their mind all day, and it sort of promotes the idea that you're always thinking about Netflix. I know that sounds really scary. Believe me, I know that sounds really scary, but it's also the truth. Netflix wants you to be thinking about them all the time, and they do accomplish that goal. So the next one is billboards. Netflix bought 32 billboards along the Los Angeles famous Sunset Boulevard for $150 million. It advised investors that it would likely spend $2 billion in 2018 on its marketing, up 85% on the spending that would go towards title brands, meaning their Netflix originals. So those billboards were used to promote their original content. It's not like the billboard said, watch season 5 of The Office. No, it said watch season 2 of Stranger Things or season 7 of Grace and Frankie. So they're definitely trying to promote their original content, but I really appreciate the way they're doing it with sort of these other mediums, and billboards is a really great way to do that if you have the ability. The third one is probably their biggest. It is social media. So to build the US social media team, because again, you got to remember that Netflix doesn't just have one social media account. There's a Netflix Canada, there's a Netflix Mexico, there's a Netflix London, there's a Netflix Paris. Like it's endless. There's Netflixes all over the world, and they all have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, probably even TikTok accounts now. So it's definitely a huge brand. But let's just talk about the US social media team. It's built about 15 people. So Netflix hires movie buffs and TV fans so that whenever they're tweeting, it feels like it's actually coming from a real source who's actually really excited about it rather than a brand who's just trying to make money. They all have backgrounds in marketing, journalism, PR, and entertainment. They also all vary in age. The team averages about 3 posts a day per Twitter and Instagram. Each platform has dedicated team members. So if you work for Netflix's social media, it's not like you're doing Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. You're probably just doing Twitter, and above all else, you're doing Twitter for Grace and Frankie or for Stranger Things. So it's very dedicated and it's a very focused group. And I think that just shows how serious they are about their marketing and how important it is to them that they get it right. Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a short break from the podcast, but when we come back, I am going to give you the 5 brands that Netflix has partnered with and talk about why those partnerships were such a big deal and how you can take some inspiration from that. So stay tuned, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Mackenzie Jakebush, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before our break, we were talking about the top 3 mediums Netflix uses to promote their content. So the number 1 being in-app notifications and email marketing. The second being billboards, and the third being social media. The third and the most important definitely is social media, because I can say as someone who's in marketing, that's where everything is right now. So it's really great that they're still reaching out, that they're doing billboards and they're doing email marketing, but your social media team really needs to be on top of their game, and they really need to be focused on their end goal. And it can't be something that is split between, okay, so we have this salesperson who's also doing marketing, so they're also doing social media, or we have this content writer who's also doing social media. Like, it doesn't work like that anymore. You definitely need a dedicated team who is passionate about creating content on social media. That way you can ensure that all the content that's being created is right for your brand and is in line with your brand's goals. So now that we're back, I'm going to talk about the top 5 brands that Netflix has partnered with, and we're going to talk about why those partnerships were so substantial and what you can take as inspiration from them. So the first one is Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola partnered with Netflix to promote Stranger Things. And the reason this partnership was so important to both Coca-Cola, Netflix, and the show Stranger Things is because Stranger Things takes place in the 80s. And in the 80s, Coca-Cola had such a unique brand, and they still do, but they had such a signature look. Everyone was drinking Coca-Cola, like nobody was drinking water, apparently. If you watch an episode of that show, they're all just drinking Coca-Cola. So it's definitely important that Netflix has the ability to reach out to Coca-Cola and get that original branding right so that they can use it in the show. But it's also important for Coca-Cola to acknowledge that Netflix is using it, because Netflix is an equally big brand and will also be using their promotion to sort of leverage this and sort of have an equal way to both get what they want out of it. So what I would encourage you to do in light of this partnership is to look for a company that is as successful as you currently are, or maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And they don't have to do the same thing as you, but if there's a way to connect those bridges so that you both can come out successful from it, try to find a way to do that, because those partnerships are always so successful and so great to move forward together and for both of the teams to really come out of it shining. The second is Ben & Jerry's. So this is a recent partnership, and they came out with an ice cream flavored called Netflix and Chilled. And earlier I talked about how one of the key things Netflix does with their marketing is they always understand what their brand is and who their customers are. They understand people like binging shows. They understand that Netflix and chill is a fun saying that usually means, you're going over to do more than hang out. But also sometimes people are like, Netflix and chill is me on my couch eating ice cream. So this partnership just really made sense on both levels. Again, they are using each other in the same way Coca-Cola and Netflix were to leverage engagement out of each other. But more than that, the brands complement each other in a way that Coca-Cola and Netflix doesn't. Coca-Cola works for Stranger Things, but Ben & Jerry's works for Netflix as a brand itself. The third one is Burger King. So this Burger King one is super interesting because it's also Stranger Things. I'm sorry, I'm not just trying to do all Stranger Things, but Stranger Things really does get a lot of marketing dollars from Netflix. So it makes sense that we would talk about them at least twice when it comes to partnerships. And again, it's very similar to Coca-Cola that Burger King is a big part of the show. And so there was a way to partner with each other to promote the show and to promote Burger King. The next one is H&M. So H&M is really big for promoting Netflix's shows across the board. So they have Stranger Things clothing, but they also have clothing that just says Netflix with that classic drop shadow. They have shows that have like The Office and like are just promoting those shows on Netflix that maybe don't get a lot of promotion because they don't need it. But H&M sells that merchandise, and Netflix maybe doesn't get a direct profit from every shirt that says Dunder Mifflin Paper Company on it, but it does still get that recognition of, you're at H&M and you're like, I'm going to buy the Office of Dunder Mifflin t-shirt. And then you're going to go home and be like, I should watch The Office on Netflix right now. So it's definitely still getting that partnership. And sometimes they really do straight up partner with them to promote specific shows. The next one is Legos, and I was really excited to talk about this brand because I think it's so interesting how Netflix can have a Lego set for shows like, again, Stranger Things. I have yet to see a Grace and Frankie Lego set, but if anyone finds it, let me know. But it's just a great way, I think, to definitely still make light of the entertainment industry and really show people that it can be fun and it can be a little childlike and it can make fun of itself, which I think is really, really important when it comes to marketing. Okay, everyone, that is it for today. Okay, everyone, that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie, and I'll be right back.